Hey class. So I wanted to do another lecture just going over and kind of putting all the hormones together and talking a little bit more about their function. Okay. So here I drew the hypothalamus. Okay. Hanging off of the hypothalamus here in this area is the posterior pituitary gland, also known as the neurohypophysis, because it's made up of neural tissue. So it's kind of like an extension of that hypothalamus. And it's connected to the hypothalamus by this stalk here, known as the infundibulum. Okay. Now, here coming off of the posterior pituitary is the adenohypophysis. Adeno means like glandular. So this is made up of glandular tissue. So when you look at this underneath the microscope, in my lab PowerPoint, I have pictures of them under the microscope, and you'll also see it in lab. But you can see it's two different types of tissue here. Even though they're right next to each other, they're a little bit separated, and they're made up of two different types of tissue, so they're stained differently under the microscope. Okay. Okay. So, the anterior pituitary, or the pituitary gland in general, is known as the master gland. Okay. That's because it secretes so many hormones that cause other hormones to be secreted, etc. So it controls a lot of, the endocrine system in the body. The hypothalamus, though, is really what stimulates the pituitary gland to make and secrete hormones. Okay, so the hypothalamus you could think of as like a switchboard for that master hormone. Okay, so we have the hypothalamus makes two different hormones that it just sends to the posterior pituitary. Okay, so we have a neuron here. Here's its cell body. It has some dendrites coming off. And here's its very long axis traveling down to the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so those two hormones that are made in the hypothalamus that are sent to the posterior pituitary are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. So oxytocin, this one here, causes contraction of the myometrium of the uterus. That's the muscle layer in the uterus during childbirth, during labor. And it stimulates milk letdown from the lobes in the breast to the nipples. Okay, and milk is made in the lobes. This is also the gland that's known for emotional changes like attachment and love that you feel, when a baby is born or when you're cuddling with your baby, things like that. Okay, and then ADH, antidiuretic hormone. This is also produced in the hypothalamus and sent to the posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary does not make any of its own hormones. Okay, and there it is released. Okay, so antidiuretic. So a diuretic is something that increases urine output. So antidiuretic is something that decreases urine output. Okay, why would we want to decrease urine output? This is when we would want to conserve water within the body. So we're dehydrated. Okay, so if we want to conserve water, we need more ADH. Okay. Okay. So alcohol, if you have ever drank a few alcoholic drinks, alcohol inhibits the release of ADH. Okay, so that's why you tend to urinate more often when you drink alcohol. this effect of inhibiting the release of ADH also causes some of the symptoms of a hangover, like dehydration, right? You're urinating out all of your water, headache, fatigue, nausea, all of those things are caused by that inhibition of release of ADH. Okay, so when we are dehydrated, our plasma osmolality is decreased. Okay, that gives us hypertonic blood. So there's less water, more solutes in the blood. Okay, so we don't want that. So we want to contain as much of that water as we possibly can, because that can be dangerous to our red blood cells. Okay. So ADH comes in and allows water to be reabsorbed in the body, okay, in the kidneys. So the kidneys allow water to be reabsorbed. We'll go through this process more when we talk about the urinary system toward the end of the semester. But just know for now, the kidneys is what create urine, right? So water is reabsorbed through the kidneys. Then our plasma volume goes up. Blood pressure also increases when this happens. Okay, and ADH can also act on blood vessels to increase blood pressure via vasoconstriction. So if we constrict those vessels, make them smaller, then the blood pressure is going to go up, because it needs to push harder to get the blood through that constricted vessel. Okay, so it acts on what's known as vasopressin receptors on the blood vessels to constrict the vessel, therefore increasing blood pressure. So sometimes ADH comes into play when we have low blood pressure as well. And we might have that when we're dehydrated. Okay, so these kind of work together. So in diabetes insipidus, this is where the hypothalamus doesn't make ADH. So it makes you very, very thirsty and always peeing. Okay, because we don't have anything that decreases that urine output and helps to absorb more water. Okay, so you get dehydrated and very thirsty. Okay, so how the hypothalamus communicates with the anterior pituitary. So I'm just gonna erase this. Let me redraw that. Okay, so here's our posterior, and then here's our anterior. I had no hypophysis here. Okay. Okay. So it sends, so the hypothalamus makes secreting hormones or releasing hormones, okay, into capillaries. So capillaries are very small blood vessels. Okay. So here we have our capillary. I'm going to open it up here. It's going to go down. And then exit. Okay, so the hypothalamus is going to make some sort of releasing hormone, like growth hormone releasing hormone, for example. Okay, it's going to travel through this capillary. So here's the hormone that I'm drawing traveling through to the anterior pituitary here through this capillary. Okay, so this is known as the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. Okay, so once that hormone travels down here, now it can be released into the systemic system. Okay, released. Okay, so hypothalamus sends down growth hormone releasing hormone. The anterior pituitary makes growth hormone, and then that hormone is sent through this hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system to be released into the systemic blood flow. Okay, and then it goes wherever it needs to go, to bone or muscle, things like that. Okay. Okay. All right, so that's how that works there. So things that are known as tropic hormones. Tropic hormones. These regulate the activity of the rest of the endocrine system. So you probably heard like corticotropic hormones, things like that. So we'll go through the different hormones on the next page here. So the anterior pituitary, so here you can see, right, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So that's a tropic hormone. So all of these are tropic hormones here. And these hormones that are made by the anterior pituitary affect things in the rest of the body. Okay. So let's go through these 7 major hormones made in the anterior pituitary. Okay. Growth hormone. This is a pretty simple one as far as we're concerned, what we're going to get into. This stimulates growth, okay, especially during childhood. So this acts on things like bone and muscle. Okay. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. Okay, this acts on the thyroid gland. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormones, right in the name, it stimulates the thyroid to release T3 and T4. So T3's full name is triiodothyronine, and T4 is thyroxine. Okay, so TSH acts on the thyroid gland, telling it to release those 2 hormones, and those increase our basal metabolic rate or our metabolism. Next, I spelled this wrong. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. So adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. This hormone stimulates secretion of glucocorticoids, like cortisol, by the adrenal cortex. So the adrenal cortex is the outer area of the adrenal gland. So we'll get into this in a little bit more detail soon. Okay, so adrenal glands, okay, because that's what it stimulates. Cortico, like the cortex, so it stimulates the cortex of the adrenal glands. And then tropic, like I said, is to bring about a change or to stimulate. Okay. Melanocyte stimulating hormone, not too much is known about this hormone, except for in excess amounts, it darkens the skin, right? So this stimulates melanocytes, those cells in the skin, if you remember from AMP1, to release melanin, which causes our different skin colors. Prolactin stimulates growth of the mammary alveoli, okay, in the breasts, and this is where milk production occurs. Okay, so this also helps to stimulate milk production, similar to oxytocin. Okay. Gonadotropins. I don't know what happened to my letters here. Okay, gonadotropins. These stimulate in the gonads, so ovaries and testes. Okay, and they bring about a change, tropic. Okay, so these ones, there's a lot more too. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about in males first, because that one's a little bit more simple. So these both have effects on males and females, but there are different effects depending on if we're talking about someone with testes or someone with ovaries. Okay, so luteinizing hormone. Okay, in males, we have seminiferous tubules. These are found within the testes. Okay, so if we were to do like a transverse section through the seminiferous tubule, there is an inside area and then an outside surrounding area. Okay. inside, we can find what's called Sertoli cells. And in this outside area, we can find what's known as Leydig cells. Okay. So follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, stimulates these Sertoli cells to produce androgen binding protein. I'll write that down. Androgen binding protein. Okay. Androgen binding protein can then bind to testosterone to produce sperm. Okay. So that's what follicle stimulating hormone does in males and people with testes. It helps to eventually produce sperm. Luteinizing hormone stimulates these Leydig cells to produce testosterone. Okay, so Leydig cell, LH stimulates Leydig cells to produce testosterone. And then FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells to produce this androgen binding protein, which binds with the testosterone made by the Leydig cells to produce sperm. Okay, so pretty simple how FSH and LH work for males. For the female system is a bit more complicated, so it becomes a bit more complicated. Okay. All right, so let me go to a fresh page here. There's kind of a lot to this. Okay, so in our ovary here, we start out with primordial follicles. So we're born with these primordial follicles here. Okay, they're not mature, but these are all of what's going to become our mature oocytes. Okay, so primordial follicles. Okay, those become, I'm not going to get into this into too much detail because we will go over this in reproductive system, of course, but these become primary follicles, and these stay frozen as this primary follicle until FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, stimulates it to be this primary follicle to become a secondary follicle. Okay, so primary, secondary follicle. Okay, so that's what follicle stimulating hormone does in the female reproductive system. Okay, this secondary follicle starts to grow and develop these cells around it. Okay, and these cells produce estrogen. Okay, then this turns into a mature Graafian follicle. The cells thicken. Okay, so this happens at day 14 of the cycle. Okay, then the egg gets ovulated or released. Okay, into the fallopian tube. So luteinizing hormone is what causes the egg to be released or ovulated. Okay, luteinizing hormone, LH. Okay, the remaining cells are yellow. Okay, luteinizing means to make something yellow. So lutein means yellow, Ising means to like make something, so making something yellow. So these remaining cells are yellow, and these are called the corpus luteum, and these produce progesterone. Okay, and then estrogen and progesterone both work together to prepare the uterus for a possible implantation, okay, of a fertilized egg. Okay, so luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, they're both named based on their function in the female reproductive system. Okay. So luteinizing hormone made those cells become yellow because it helped to release that egg. Okay, so luteinizing. And then follicle stimulating hormone stimulated this primary follicle to become the secondary follicle. Okay, so hopefully that helps you to remember their function within the female reproductive system. Okay, all right. So now let's go into our glands and talk a little bit more about what happens in some of these selected glands. Okay, so here on top I drew this thyroid gland. So it kind of looks like a butterfly. We have two lobes, one on either side, and then in the middle, this area that connects them is known as the isthmus. Okay. Behind the thyroid gland, we have these 4 glands known as the parathyroid glands. Okay. Parathyroid glands. Okay. So let's start with the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland secretes thyroid hormone, so T3 and T4, like we talked about in the PowerPoint lecture. These are especially important as a fetus or as a child for growth. Okay, so they increase our metabolic activity and rate, but they're important throughout life as well. Okay, thyroid gland, if it produces too much thyroid hormone, this is known as hyperthyroidism. Okay, hyper, like too much. And in this case, someone would, their metabolic rate would increase, so they tend to lose a lot of weight. Okay, and they also tend to run hot because their body is always working. If the thyroid gland produces too little thyroid hormone, you can get what's known as hypothyroidism. So hypo is like an underproduction. Okay. In this case, someone's metabolic rate is going to decrease, so they will gain weight, and they tend to be cold. Okay, so they don't run hot, they run colder because they don't have as much of that metabolic activity creating energy and heat. Okay, the thyroid gland also secretes calcitonin, which decreases our blood calcium level. Okay, so it inhibits osteoclasts that break down bone, and it helps to build up bone. Okay, so it keeps the calcium within the bone instead of being absorbed within the blood. And this is an antagonist to parathyroid hormone, which is made by these parathyroid glands here. Okay. So it's an antagonist to it because parathyroid hormone increases blood calcium levels. So they work together to keep our blood calcium levels, at an equilibrium that we like. Okay. Okay. These also help calcitonin and parathyroid hormone with proper muscle function, because calcium is important in muscle action, as you learned in A&P 1. Okay. Here we have our pancreas. Okay. So in the pancreas, there are a few different endocrine. There are also exocrine enzymes that are released, and then there are a few different endocrine hormones. I'm just going to discuss two here. The endocrine hormones are released from the islets of Langerhans. Okay, alpha cells in the islets are going to produce glucagon. Glucagon increases our blood sugar levels. And then beta cells are going to produce insulin, which decrease our blood sugar levels. So again, these work together. They're also antagonists because they do opposite things, but they work together to help stabilize our blood sugar levels. Okay, next we have, here I drew a kidney, so a little kidney bean shape. This is the ureter coming off of it here. Okay, and then on top it has this little hat here, right? This is the adrenal gland. So we have one on top of each kidney. Okay. This outer area here is the cortex. And the inner area is known as the medulla. Okay. So from the cortex, we create androgens, hydrocortisone, also known as cortisol, and aldosterone. From the medulla, so actually let me write this down so that we don't get lost. So we secrete androgens, cortisol, and aldosterone. All from that cortex area. From the medulla, we release epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about all of these. So let's talk about the kidney itself. So if we don't have enough oxygen in our blood, okay, the kidney is filtering the blood. The adrenal gland, okay, will produce erythropoietin. Erythropoietin. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail when we get to blood in the next unit, but just to have a little bit of background. This erythropoietin will circulate to our red bone marrow. Our red bone marrow, again, is found in the epiphyses of long bones, the ends of long bones, and throughout flat bones, okay, and the vertebrae. Red bone marrow through hemopoietic stem cells produce red blood cells, also produce white blood cells and platelets. Okay. So that's all caused by erythropoietin. Now erythropoietin can be shut off so as not to get polycythemia, which is having too many red blood cells, right? That would make our blood thick and can cause issues. Or we can become anemic, have not enough red blood cells. So erythropoietin helps to stabilize the amount of red blood cells that we have. Okay, calcitriol is something else that's produced in the kidneys. These are both hormones as well. So the sun and food gives us our precursor to vitamin D. Okay. Kidneys are what convert it to calcitriol. Okay, this is our active form of vitamin D, which gives us healthy teeth and bones. Okay, all right. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, these two here, produced from the adrenal medulla. Okay. These are part of our sympathetic nervous system, which is our flight or fight response. Okay. Epinephrine helps to increase our heart rate. Both of these together help to increase our heart rate, increase our stroke volume. We'll talk more about stroke volume when we get to the heart. Increase our respiratory rate, dilate our bronchioles, so bronchodilation, decrease our peripheral circulation. So this is what kind of makes us pale when we're kind of scared of something, and dilate our pupils so that we can take in more of our surroundings if something is temporarily stressing us out. Okay, they both work together. Epinephrine more so deals with those heart things, so increasing heart rate, increasing stroke volume, and norepinephrine deals more with the blood vessels, so decreasing peripheral circulation, for example. Okay, so that's the function of epinephrine and norepinephrine. All right, so now let's get into androgens. This one's pretty straightforward as well. These are our like male secondary characteristic hormones, but females also have androgens. Okay, so these are like the weaker male hormones. Testosterone is like the more strong or potent, I guess, male hormone. So androgens stimulate muscle development, female distribution of body hair, so like axillary and pubic hair, and stimulates the female libido. Okay, and then also give males their secondary sex characteristics. Okay, like deeper voice and things like that. All right. Let's do aldosterone, then we'll get into cortisol because cortisol is a little bit more in depth. So aldosterone increases blood sodium levels. Okay, this is a mineralocorticoid. So corticoid because it's made by the cortex, the adrenal cortex. Mineralo because it deals with minerals like sodium. Okay, so aldosterone increases blood sodium level, and this increases our blood pressure because sodium encourages the body to retain fluid, which would increase our blood volume, right? We'd have more fluid within the plasma of our blood, increasing our blood volume and increasing blood pressure. So if our blood pressure went down, aldosterone helps to try to bring it up. Okay. All right, and then cortisol. Okay. So cortisol is a steroid, okay, a glucocorticoid, also known as hydrocortisone. Okay, so this is a stress hormone. So when we're in stress, again, when we're in like that fight or flight mode, it helps to increase our survival. Okay. So it helps to increase sugar within our blood. It will do this by causing gluconeogenesis if necessary. So gluconeogenesis is creating new glucose. So forming glucose from lactic acid and proteins. It will also increase fats in the blood if we need longer term energy. Okay. But if you're just stressed normally, okay, but you don't actually need to like run away from a bear or something like that, these fats that it puts into your blood will clog your arteries. Okay, so this long-term stress is really, really bad for you, unless you're using it to, you know, exercise by running, fighting, or flighting from getting away from something, right? Cortisol can also break down muscle for proteins. Okay. If you're stressed from an illness, for example, those proteins can be used for can be repurposed into antibodies to help us increase our survival. Okay, so again, cortisol is all about survival. It also inhibits inflammation. Okay, in case of injury. So say you're running away from this bear and you trip and fall and you sprain your ankle, right? You want to be able to keep running. So we want to inhibit that inflammation, at least short term, so that we can get away from something that's even more imminent danger than our sprained ankle. Okay. So you've probably heard of like skincare hydrocortisone creams. Okay, steroid creams. these also help to decrease inflammation in the skin. Okay. They do thin out the skin by decreasing collagen fiber, so the skin becomes atrophied over time. So again, this is a steroid, cortisol. So steroids, because of everything that we just discussed, make you feel great, at least short term, right? But they don't usually treat something, right? So if you have appendicitis and you're given steroids and sent home, right, you might feel great. You won't feel pain anymore, but it doesn't treat it. So it'll decrease the inflammation, but eventually, that appendicitis can burst, the appendix can burst, and dangerous things could happen there, okay? But if you just have something in your respiratory system that's inflamed, you want those steroids to decrease that inflammation so that you can breathe, right? You need something quickly to help you out. Okay. Okay. So that is